Hey guys, welcome back to the workshop. I did not pick up many watches this year, but there's an easy number one for my 2024 list, and that is this rectangular tank from Merkur. But first, let's take a look on wrist. I like the tank shape because it's actually a style that fits a variety of wrists. And a quick spec list, this one actually has a sapphire crystal and a automatic NH movement, which is a feature that not a lot of tank watches have, so was a main push in me picking this one. You do have to give up that thinner style case though, so you do have that slightly thicker case. So in terms of text and branding, Merkur is actually not a nonsense word. It's German for Mercury, and that was last used by the Ford Motor Company. It was a dead car brand from between 1985 and 1989. So I don't think there's going to be too much fighting over that name. Levé is French for escapement, and finally we have automatic. And all in all, it's a very nice balancing of the text on the dial. Now you do have to get past the fact that there's 3 different languages on there, which is, I think, a little bit funny, but you might find annoying. And in terms of dimensions, there's not a lot of information either on the listing or online, so I'm going to try and be careful with this metal caliper. You can get some specific readings. Not so much a diameter, but width-wise, we are at 28.25 millimeters. And our lug-to-lug length here is just over 43 millimeters. And in terms of thickness, just under 12 millimeters. And finally, these are 20 millimeter lugs. This dial is the most popular choice, and it also happens to be my favorite. I'm confident calling this streamlined modern in style, and that's in the name. It was a more streamlined outgrowth of the Art Deco movement, and there are a few other variants, but this one, I can throw those up on the screen right now, maybe a few. This one is by far my favorite, especially with those, really slick numerals and then the silver border on the flat white dial. It's very just indicative of that style. And obviously a minute track is not super practical on a tank watch because of the rectangular shape, but it is just such a classic look. And it looks great with those equally tiny blued hands there. And it's difficult to tell with how these Chinese watches do the bluing this day, but it's more important to see just how level and even and that really nice dark blue luster. So it's done really well. And while I said that these hands are tiny, they're actually quite broad and flat, so that gives a really nice canvas for the bluing. And as always, one of the most important things is that the side of the hands are also blued evenly, and these are. So it's a great looking dial. Again, we have a curved sapphire crystal, and I might not be the biggest fan of those other dial variations, but at least it helps justify the cost of the component for the factory because this is kind of a special order on that particular shape. The curve integrates really nicely with the case sides there, and it's really indicative of the streamlined modern aesthetic to have this sort of rectilinear design broken up by a single curved line. And there are 2 schools of thoughts on tank watches. The most well-known is probably the super slim, flat Cartier tank, which is obviously homage by Seiko and Sanda here on the Chinese market. But then there's also the sort of more robust 1950s curve variants, of which I feel like this is much more of that feel and also my preference. Now, in terms of finishing, the polishing is really nicely done. If I could change anything, I would love to just have a single brushed line going up one of these curves, just to kind of emphasize that masculine tankiness. Speaking of which, stick around to the end and I will compare this with a very similar vintage Swiss watch. And let's look at the sides briefly. Unlike the top of the case, there is some very nice horizontal brushing. It's on both sides. And others have mentioned this too, but I'm a big fan of this crown because the proportions are really nice. It's quite grippy, but at the same time, it's not too thick. And I also like the use of the Merkur logo here because it's definitely a bit too modern to use on the dial there. And in terms of, watch face logos, maybe Long Island watch could take a few notes there. But this is a push-pull crown, and there is unfortunately a ghost date position. That is a trade-off because this is using the NH05 Seiko Epson movement. So that's just a slightly smaller diameter version, typically for ladies' watches, but here the tank requires it. And again, so it's a trade-off. You've got that ghost position, but you also have the peace of mind of just that bulletproof and easily replaced and serviced movement. Blah, blah, blah. I realized I should probably show you the brushing there again. Again, very nice. And let's get to the elephant in the room, because we do have this nicely engraved case back with one major flaw. And it's not the Team Merkur watch at the top, but there you go. The rectangular. So this is a really beautiful watch. I could see myself recommending it to people who are not into Chinese watches, but that one bit of jank just kind of pushes it over the edge. We do have a nicely engraved pagoda here, and some specifications: stainless steel, sapphire crystal, and a water resistance of 30 meters. Again, because this is a tank, it's secured by screws, so you'll have a lower water resistance. Now, I do think if we do see another production run of these watches, they'll replace the case back, but still, it's tough to see. Now, on the good side, and what I really love, is how low these lugs come down. So you can see that this watch is going to conform very nicely on wrist. And this watch band, I believe that you can request a different one if you want. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about the suede, but I'm really pleasantly surprised. So for one, I like the gray color. It really goes with the overall clean look of the watch. But then also the suede sort of brings down the dressiness a bit. It's held up quite well. I've worn this a lot. And you can see it has quick release pins on the back. It's signed. And then I also like this brushed buckle here. Now, in terms of pricing, not to brag, but I think I did pretty well because I got in really close to the launch of this watch and on the last fall sale. So I've got the receipts. Mine came in at around $107 US. I think that's an amazing price, basically a steal, especially because it comes with this fairly nice case that's useful on its own. The current retail price is listed at around $175 US. I think it's a bit high, but still a decent price. It will undoubtedly come down in the next sale. But if you are in the US, you've got those new tariffs to worry about, so your mileage may vary. Pretty much just by looking at photos online, you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is strictly a dress watch, but I've actually been wearing it more as sort of a classy, everyday driver. Now, that's not to say that it wouldn't work as a unisex watch if you're a woman that likes slightly larger watches. I'm going to say that this is going to wear similar to a 36mm round watch. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there's really two different types of tank watchers. There's the thin Mousse de Cartier type, and then there's this more sculpted everyday style. That brings us to this absolutely beautiful Longines, if you ignore the old man Expando bracelet. But this is a vintage watch from exactly the era that the Merkur is calling back to. The numerals are even similar to some of those alternate dials. I especially love this circular detail on the hour hand. And this would have been a mid-century man's everyday watch. Obviously, vintage watches are going to be a bit more diminutive, but the vibes are essentially the same here. It's also interesting to see that we have that rectilinear shape with a bit of a curve to it, except that here, this one is concave versus the convex over here. And it also goes to show how far watches have really come and are really manufacturing and commercial processes, because we have so much more detail in terms of the case finishing, as well as obviously the material on the crystal. But again, very beautiful watch. Nothing wrong here. Vintage watches, unfortunately, they don't do as well on the algorithm. So if you like, comment, subscribe, any of those good things, I'd love to do more of an in-depth look at pieces like this, especially because with those potential tariffs coming in, we're starting to see prices creep up on the lower end. So, we're starting to see price parity. Anyways, that was the review of the Merkur Tank, or the Rectangular. Unfortunately, they misspelled it as Rectangular, and I really hope that they fix that because I've really been enjoying this watch. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. It's great to be back to the platform, and I will see you next time.